Hi, and welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. Birth stories, birth education, and the pursuit of surrendering it all to God. Let's get started. I'm so thrilled for today's episode with Kathleen. The journey we get to hear from her hospital births where she felt violated to her redemptive home birth where she could tangibly feel the Lord's presence and all of His grace and mercy along the way is one for the books. I really hope you enjoy hearing her 3 birth stories today, but on that note, we do discuss miscarriage as well. And although I know that can be very hard to listen to depending on your circumstances, I think if you're ready to listen, you'll find God's joy and peace amidst it all. Let's jump in. Well, welcome to another episode of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast. Today, I'm excited to introduce you guys to Kathleen. Kathleen, would you mind, just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. This is a topic I love to talk about, so I'm really excited to share a lot of our stories because I have so many children. But I have 3 kids, 2, 4, and 6, and all 3 of my births were very different. So I'm really kind of excited to do that, to kind of like dissect those today. But I am 30, turned 30 this year,
Woohoo!
and I know that was wild. Like, I don't feel any different, but I do feel different, so, like, that's just, like, a crazy milestone. Um, I've been married for almost 10 years, which is crazy, and, yeah, we used to be active duty Coast Guard, so we moved around a lot, but now we are back in North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh, and just really loving it here. So, just a little, also, I love food. I love all things food all the time, so
And don't you have a meal plan that you do?
So I had a meal plan subscription at one point and really loved it, and now I've kind of transitioned into, like, sharing meals here and there, and I have, like, a Shopify that has meal plans that you can purchase or, like, different kinds of recipe bundles, so it's kind of evolving as we go, but I just, like, really love to spend time in the kitchen, and it's just I love to feed my family. I feel like some people hate cooking dinner. Like, I have so many friends who just, like, despise cooking dinner, like, breakfast or anything, and it is truly such a, like, stress reliever for me, and so it's a like, my husband comes home and takes all the kids so that I can cook dinner because for me, that's really, like, a way to unwind throughout the day. I love to serve my family in that way, and then everyone gets a home-cooked meal, so it's just a win-win for everyone at that point, but, yeah, it's definitely a big part of my heart is the kitchen.
Well, that's awesome. I wouldn't say I despise cooking dinner, but it's not an unwinding process for me. Now, baking, on the other hand, I love to bake. So if I'm making like a cake or like brownies or
I
bread,
feel like you're one or the other.
yeah.
Like, I feel like you either love one and hate the other or vice versa, and I find that people who love to bake love the structure and the science of it, and that, like, I mean, baking is so hard. Like, you literally have to have
Mhm.
everything to a T, whereas cooking is more of, like, you kind of flow with it or, like, what do you like? What can you throw together? What can you mix? And that's definitely more my personality. So I always find it's so funny when I, have friends who love to bake because they tend to love the structure of baking and, like, how precise it is.
Yeah, I don't know if I like the precision or if I just like the fact that everything is delicious afterwards. It's like it's like a treat. So,
Oh.
well, I have seen your cooking stuff on Instagram and I love that. That's awesome that you love to cook so much. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's get started talking about these births. So, what was it like finding out you were pregnant for the first time?
So we were living in Fort Lauderdale, actually, and with the Coast Guard. We were stationed down there, and we had been trying to have a baby for almost 2 years with no luck. So it was just like sort of a stressful time. And I had this is like a weird story. I didn't even think I was going to get into this, but I had a friend, a Coast Guard wife friend, pass away in August. And she was 22. It was like this, she was my first Coast Guard friend, and she had her second baby at 21. And then at 22, found out she had cancer. And it was just devastating. And then she passed away in August. So, like, we went through that whole season with her for about a year. And I went out to visit her before she passed away when she was on home hospice. And truly, like, she is someone who, like, so pure of heart, truly just like loved the Lord so much. And she, in those last few days, I saw her that we flew out the day before she passed away. So I spent the previous 2 days with her. And I just remember, I was like getting her ready for bed one night, and I felt like the Lord was just like, let her speak. Like, don't prompt her with anything. Just like, let her speak. And this is when we had been trying for years to have a baby. And, she had a baby at 18 and then 20, and was just like, it wasn't hard for her at all. And I just was letting her talk, like, whatever. I just was, remember, like, trying to absorb everything she said, because it was, everything she said was like so meaningful and intentional. And she paused for a moment, and she was like, I'm just really so excited that I'm going to meet your baby before you do. And, like, she just was like in this really serene place. Um, and I think, like, before you pass away, like, she knew she was passing away. She was on home hospice, and she really had such a peace about her. And when she said that to me, I was like, that's so wild. And she had mentioned that she felt like it was going to be a girl. And I was like, that's so crazy. That's, whatever. And so we flew home the next day. And that following month, September, is when I found out I was pregnant with my oldest. And I my husband and I shared a car at that point, and I dropped him off to the Coast Guard station because he was on like a fireman schedule. So he was on 2 days home, 2 days on, 2 days, and like sliding weekends, which means like every other weekend he had duty. So I dropped him off. It was like, 6 a.m., the worst. And I went home, and it was still dark out. And I remember taking a test, and in like our downstairs powder room, and because it was so dark out and like all the lights were off, I had like the hall light on, but not the bathroom light on. So I like took the test and then put it on the floor to like, put my clothes back on. And like, I looked down on the floor, and it looked like nothing. So I was like, whatever, no big deal. And then I picked it up and went into the kitchen and turned the light on. And I like pulled the drawer that the trash can was out to throw it away. And I went to throw it away, and I was like, and I looked at it like, what? And it was like the more I looked, the darker the line became. And I just like remember standing there thinking like, I just had seen so many negative tests for years, and I was like, "What?" Like, and I just was sure that it was like a mistake, or that it was just like a faulty test. I don't know. Like, I just assumed it was not what it was, and I just remember immediately thinking like, I cannot tell him over the phone. So like, I'm gonna have to sit with this for 2 days, like just not telling my husband. And I just was like, I guess I didn't talk to him for 2 days straight. I mean, I didn't text him or call him or anything. I think he probably thought that like I was just didn't want to talk to him, or like was mad at him or whatever. But I just remember being shocked and sending a picture to one of my other Coast Guard wife friends and being like, this can't be real. Like, is this real? And I just remember her texting me back and saying, like, there are no false positives. Like, that's not a thing. And I was like, what? So like she knew. And then when I picked him up from the Coast Guard station, I like had like a box with, that he opened, and it had the test in it. And he was like, what? Like, it just was a real shock for us. And I had that August, when I had gone out to see Madison before she passed away, I had also made an appointment to like see our OBGYN and like talk about fertility stuff. And like she was like, okay, like, we want you to call us when your period comes, because that's when we'll like almost like measure everything out. Like, they basically do a process of like, this is what we're going to test you for on the first day of your period, or, all that stuff. And I remember calling her the day my period was supposed to come, and I was like, I think I'm pregnant. And she was like, that's great news. Like, it just was like nothing I expected, but very timely, especially when I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's amazing. I love that
Yeah.
story. No, I appreciate you sharing that about your friend and everything. That's incredible. So, yay. So after years of trying, now
Yeah.
you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And so had you like in those years of trying planned out like what kind of birth you want to have or what kind of care you wanted to seek, or were you just waiting until you got pregnant to like look into any of that?
I cannot even explain to you how different I am now than I was back then. And
Aren't we all?
oh my gosh, the wildest part about it is like, okay, so I got pregnant at 23, 23. And none of my friends were even married at this point. I mean, none of my friends were married. And so I didn't have friends like that had kids. I had some Coast Guard wife friends who had kids, but like I didn't grow up with them. I didn't like I barely knew them at this point. And so I just assumed you do whatever your doctor tells you. And you just, I don't know. I don't know what I thought. I thought nothing about this. Like, when they talked about like a birth plan or whatever, I was like, I guess it'll just go how it goes. You know what I mean? Like, and I look back and I'm like, Kathleen, you are just so naive. But I didn't know that you even made a plan. I didn't even know there was a thing as home birth. I mean, truly, I had no idea. I thought like people didn't even do natural birth anymore. I don't know what I thought, but I was so uneducated and so just naive to thinking about anything. So it's just, I look back and I'm like, oh, you poor thing. Someone should have told you.
So let me guess. So you went to your local OBGYN.
Yeah, I did.
Yep. And you had all your tests done and all your appointments.
Oh,
You drank
yeah.
all the things
Oh,
and they took all
yeah.
your blood
Oh,
and
yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Okay. So amongst that experience, did that just seem then like just very normal to you and like
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
really went wrong? Everything was pretty smooth?
So the whole process of like, okay, so I had hyperemesis during
Mhm.
that pregnancy.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
basically, like for people who don't know what that is, it's called HG. Hyperemesis gravidarium. It's a terrible word, honestly. But it basically, I threw up every day, all day for 9 months. I mean, when I tell you I threw up in the car, I threw up on myself at a party. Like it was like I couldn't keep any food down. My first few months of pregnancy, I lost like 20 pounds. It was terrible. And I just remember thinking, like, this is not what it's supposed to be like. This feels really unfair. Like pregnancy is supposed to be like this beautiful, magical thing. And then you have HG and you're like, wait, this is a nightmare, actually. Like, how am I supposed to do this? So that was terrible. However, everything else about my pregnancy was totally normal. So that was like really just a curveball. But when it comes to like, I never had complications. Like I never had gestational diabetes. Like there was just nothing else that was out of the norm, is what I would say. Everything else was pretty routine. And so, besides the HG, the whole process of being pregnant, I mean, I just basically did whatever the OBGYN told me to do. And, I did what's that drink? I don't even know what it's called.
Glucola.
Yeah, the glucose drink. That was
Mhm.
disgusting. But I did
Mhm.
it because I was like, oh, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. The whole process, everything, I just was like, "Oh, this is just normal." And I did have a few friends, Coast Guard wife friends, who saw the same OBGYN, who were pregnant alongside me. We were all doing the same pregnant routine. So nothing seemed abnormal to me. Um, and I remember, like, at the end of my pregnancy, her being like, "So, like, do you have a" I don't even think she asked, like, "Do you have a birth plan?" I think it was more like, "So what do you wanna do?" Or like, "What are you thinking?" Like, kinda like that, like, I don't know. And I was like, "I don't know. I'm sure we'll just go with whatever happens." Like, I don't wanna, like, overthink it. I feel like we should just do whatever the baby needs to do. Truly, I literally roll my eyes at myself right now because I'm like, "Oh, honey." Like, just there was no one who was, like, empowering me to be like, "Hey, there are other ways to do this, and also you get to choose everything. Like, you get to decide how this goes." And I just was like, "Oh, the baby decides, and the OBGYN knows more than I do about the baby, so I'll just listen to her." So, I got my membrane swept, like, and then at the end she was like, "So, I'm gonna go on vacation next week." Uh, and my husband was about to go on duty for 3 days. She was like, "So, like, we could induce you and then like easy, we can just you can have me as your doctor, your husband will be there, all the things." And I was like, "Okay, like, sure. Is that what we're supposed to do? Sure. Okay." Like, I just didn't
And
know.
how many weeks for
I
you?
mean, I was 39 and 6 days. So it wasn't like I was like 38 or anything like that. So I was 40 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, but I just did it because I was told to do it, and I was like, "Oh, if they're telling me to do that, that's probably a good idea." So I went in and I wasn't like having contractions or nothing. I mean, like everything was totally standstill. So when I went in, they called me as soon as they had a bed at the hospital. And we went in at like 10 p.m. I think we like had gone out to dinner waiting for them to call us. And then they called us at dinner and they're like, "Come in whenever." And so we went home and packed up all our stuff and went to the hospital. And I remember going in and they the biggest thing I can remember from this experience with my oldest is the fact that I felt like up until then, all the nurses in my OB's office, like they knew my name. They knew we were not finding out the gender. They knew about my husband's job. Like they were so personable and sweet. And like it was like I felt so comfortable there. And the minute I walked into the hospital, I felt like no one knew who I was or cared who I was. Like I was just a number. And I didn't really know how to put that into words until like after. But I went in, I didn't know any of the nurses, and I had to have Cervidil,
Mhm.
which is like that little pill that's wrapped in paper that they insert into your cervix. And I didn't know what that was. I mean, I didn't even know what it was like to be induced, what that meant. I just was like, "Oh, okay."
So your OB never gave you a heads up on what an induction would look like, what the risks
No.
were, what
No.
any.
Oh, no. No, I've
Okay.
never heard a risk ever of anything. So I went in and they were like, "Okay, like you're gonna get undressed and we're gonna put an IV in, lay on your back. Now we're putting Cervidil in." And I just remember being like, "Wait, like, like you're in such a vulnerable state during that part of your pregnancy and birth. And also as a new mom and a first time mom, you have no idea what birth is like because you've never experienced it. You just don't know what to expect. So then when no one tells you, I felt so scared. Like I just was so overwhelmed. And then they put the Cervidil in, and then they told me I had to stay on my back for 2 hours. So then I was like, okay. But I was really uncomfortable because I was pregnant and laying on my back. And so that was really stressful. They kept coming in and like checking me, which I also did not know that they did that. So, like, I didn't know there were cervical checks while you were in labor. So, like,
Can I
multiple
ask you a quick
times.
question?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you take any sort of childbirth class or read any
No.
like books? Okay.
No, gosh, no. I had no idea they checked you. So every time they came in to like check, which was often, like when I say often, probably every 30 minutes to an hour,
Wow.
I felt so, I mean, this might sound dramatic, but I felt so violated because it was like no one was telling me no one was asking me to check. They were telling me they were checking me. So it was very like, I guess I just do what I'm told. Okay, this is fine. And I just remember after the 2 or 3 hours was up and I could finally like sit up, I like sat up and I was like noticeably shaken up, just like what is happening to me? Like what is happening? No one is telling me what's going on and everyone's just like in and out and doing whatever they want and I'm the one having a baby here. Like I don't know what to do or anything. And I just like burst into tears. And Dean just stood in front of me and he was like, "Whoa, what is going on?" And I was like, "I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel like anyone here is like for me. So I'm really stressed out because I just didn't even feel like anyone looked at me. Like they didn't see me. And I would like cry when they were checking me because the Cervidil was so uncomfortable. And they just didn't even ask if I was okay. Like they just did whatever. And he just like sent the nurses out and was like, "No, she needs a minute. And he just like put his hands on me and prayed over me for like peace and just like a calm spirit. And I definitely calmed down and that was really helpful. Um, and then I was, progressing like contractions throughout the night because I had served at like 11:30 p.m. And throughout the night, the contractions got like stronger and more miserable and painful. But like, I don't really think I was progressing. And so when the nurse came in at like 4 a.m., she was like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "Well, I mean, like, do you want an epidural?" And I was like, I don't know." And I just like freaked out. I was like, "I don't know. Like, what do you mean? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Do I do that now? Do I do it later? Is it too soon? Is it too late? I don't understand." And she was like, "Well, it's up to you." That's what she said to me. And I was like, "Okay." And I was so scared. I didn't know. And I was in so much pain. And I was like, "Yes, I want an epidural." So they came up, did an epidural. I want to say it was like at 7 a.m. or something around that time. And I finally like relaxed and slept for a few hours. And I do have to say, when they put my epidural in, I felt nothing from the waist down. I mean, like, truly, I would have forgotten I had legs because I had no feeling whatsoever. So I was like, "Oh, all right, I'll take a nap." So I was not progressing very quickly. So they came in and the shift change at like 7 a.m. The nurse who had come in and taken over for the night nurse, who I just could not stand her. She truly, I don't know how she was a nurse because she had no bedside manner. So the new nurse that came in at 7, she came in and she just was like, truly, there was like joy just coming out of her. And she was so sweet. You could tell she'd been doing this forever. She brought a peanut ball in and like had me like change positions a few times. And then I took a nap again. And then eventually by like, I want to say 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I was like, "I definitely feel like I have to go to the bathroom." And she was like, "Well, that's usually means you're ready to push." So she checked me. I was 10 centimeters. They called my OB. She came in. It was like this very like, okay. I mean, I literally felt nothing. So then came in like 15 minutes of pushing. I was like, "Am I doing it? I don't know. Like, is that what's happening?" They're like, "Yeah, you're doing great." I was like, "All right." So I pushed, I want to say for 20 minutes and she was out and we didn't know the gender. So like then they put her on me and they had Dean look and then tell me. And that was just like so sweet. And we really felt like it was a girl the whole time. Like I was convinced. You could not change my mind, especially after what Madison had said that last summer. And so that part was like so sweet for sure. And again, I did not know what to expect when it came to like recovery or postpartum or anything. So I just like, oh, I guess it's different for everyone and it happens how it happens. And so I just assumed anything that happened to me postpartum was like normal, which truly my postpartum experience was pretty good, other than like, I don't know, you figure out how to heal, you figure out how to walk and go to the bathroom and all of that after. So that was pretty normal, standard, not anything to write home about or like be stressed about. But overall, that was my experience with having my oldest. And she just turned 6. So, like, to think about how different my experience is now and like how my births have evolved is really wild.
Well, so, okay, so your births obviously evolved. You said your kids were 6 and 4 and 2. So I'm
Yes.
guessing somewhere there in the first year and a half or so of that child's life,
Yes.
you ended up getting pregnant. Was it planned? Was it not planned?
So, after I had my oldest, her name is Blair. After I had Blair, I went to my postpartum 6-week checkup and I had an abnormal pap smear. And so then I had to go back like in a couple weeks or something for a colposcopy, which is basically where they like scrape stuff off and send it out for a biopsy. And when I got that back, they had told me, they were like, "Okay, so there's precancerous cells and there's a mass on your cervix." And they said this all very like by the way, this is what we found. So now we're going to refer you to an OBGYN oncologist. Here's this person. You can make an appointment with them. And I was like, wait a second. Like, what do you mean oncologist? Like, that's a scary word. That is not like a dermatologist. It's not like we're referring you to like a foot doctor. It was scary. I was like, what does that mean? So, of course, I like panicked and I was like, okay, I'm dying. Everything is terrible. Oh my gosh. So, come to find out, I had a precancerous mass on my cervix and like precancerous cells. So, through that process, they were like, we're going to have to do surgery and it's called a leap cone biopsy. So I did a surgery. I want to say I was 8 months postpartum. Yeah, I had to be 8 months postpartum. So they referred me
But
out.
they found it at your 6-week checkup.
Yes.
Okay.
So like I had to have a bunch of different appointments basically that kind of like routed to that. So like the 6-week checkup, then it was like another few weeks before I did the colposcopy. And then I had to do the referral to the oncologist. And then she had to do a colposcopy. And then I had to schedule a surgery. So I had her in June and the surgery was in January. So it was probably 6 or 7 months actually postpartum when it all finally, evolved. And so they did this leap cone biopsy and they told me after that it would be very hard for me to conceive again. And if I did, I would most likely miscarry. And I was like, what? That's pretty intense. Why would you say that? Like that. So I went through this like grief process where I was like, oh my gosh, like I just became a mom. And I have to say, like, I have terrible pregnancies and HG is a nightmare. The Lord has truly blessed my postpartum season every time. I mean, I have great experiences breastfeeding. I have great experiences bonding with my children. Like, so much of the postpartum season is good. And so, this first postpartum season, I discovered that, like, I had realized my identity in being a mom was like, oh my gosh, I was made for this. Like, this is what my life is about. Everything about this is good. I love this. Like, I mean, being a stay at home mom felt like Christmas for me. So then they told me, you most likely will miscarry any other baby that you could maybe conceive. And I was just like grief stricken about the whole thing. And I just remember being like, this isn't right. This is not, this cannot be what God has because look at what my life is with my daughter. Like that, there's just no way that's it. Not that it wouldn't be enough, but like I just knew there was so much of me that was meant to be a mom that I knew that there had to be more there. So I had this leap cone biopsy, everything seemed normal after the surgery. And we didn't really talk about what it was like to try for more kids. Like we just didn't with my doctor, no one addressed that after they had said that to me. So I just was like, okay, whatever. So I was really just enjoying being a mom. And the fact that my first pap smear after that, it was like 3 months after, like came back totally clear. So I was like, okay, like I'm just going to be, in that first year of motherhood, it's like, I can't even think about having another baby. That's crazy. So I stopped nursing right at 1 year and went right before I stopped nursing. Or right after I went on a work trip to Utah for a week and came back and I went with a girlfriend of mine and we came back and then in July she had gotten her period and we were like synced up at this point. You know how you can like sync up with your girlfriends. So we spent a lot of time together. So like we always were talking about that. And so I was like, oh, you got yours, I'm going to get mine surely this week. It's like a week or two goes by and I don't even think about it. And because I had gotten one period after stopping nursing. Then she got a period. And then like 2 weeks later, she was like, are you done your period yet or something? And I was like, no, I never got it. And I was like, that's weird, but it's probably just because I've only gotten one period postpartum. So like, I'm sure it's just figuring itself out. And she was like, okay. And then the next morning I woke up and threw up and I was like, yep, that's for sure. And so I texted her and I said, "Do you have a pregnancy test?" And she was like, "Yes." So I went over to her house with my other girlfriend, uh, my two sweet friends who lived like right across the street, and didn't even tell Dean because I was like, surely this has to be a mistake. However, I'm vomiting. That only happens when this happens. And so, I went upstairs in the bathroom and it was like a digital. So I took it, I put it on the floor, and I went to like pull my pants up and I looked down within like 30 seconds. It was like pregnant. And I was like, what? And the first thing that went through my mind was like, I cannot do that again. Because the whole scenario of like vomiting, birth trauma, then like surgery after having a bit, like it was like everything was like, there's no way I can do that again. And then I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to miscarry anyway. Like it was like, I just didn't even know what to say. And I just remember I came downstairs and they both, they're both like, so, and I was like, I'm pregnant. And they were both like, they were like so excited. And, you know, they both love babies and were so sweet on my kids that they just couldn't contain themselves. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And they just kind of were like so excited. And I was like, what does this mean? So, of course, I left my oldest with them to drive back across the street to tell Dean. They were like, well, watch Blair, go tell Dean right now. So I went over and just showed him the test. He was like, what? Like, because, of course, we're both in our minds, we're like, oh, this isn't going to happen. So, like, whatever. And he was like, this is crazy. Like, what? Like, he just was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I don't know what to make of this. So that was wild, to say the least. And again, the only abnormal part of this pregnancy was my HG and being so sick as a dog. Everything else was normal, no red flags on any of my tests or whatever. And at this point, after I had my daughter and I had this surgery, I got like ruthless with the chemicals in our life. I mean, I got rid of anything and everything that could possibly be cancerous or harmful. Or, I mean, like we were eating all organic. I got rid of all fragrance in our home, nothing with harsh chemicals. Like I was ruthless because I just was so aware of how valuable my life was now that my daughter was in it. And now how valuable her life is, like things that would disrupt her hormones or mess with her body. Like just we got really intense about it. So that spurred into my second pregnancy of now things are going to be very different. And I definitely still was with my OB who I really liked personality wise. I loved her. I mean, she's such a sweet woman. I have great memories with her as a person, like as a human being. And I really think that she was offering what she knew. Like, I think she was offering in true confidence and joy what she knew to be true and to be right. So I don't fault her for anything, especially when like she was not even really there until like the delivery part of my birth. So that pregnancy, I mean, I was like, don't give me that glucose drink. Like, I'm gonna, eat something different. I was just like crazy about anything because, of course, this baby was so valuable to me, and I had no idea if anything would harm them because of my history with everything else. So then I just remember one of my girlfriends, the one who brought me the pregnancy test, she had trained a little bit to be a doula. And she was like, do you want to make a birth plan together? And I was like, yeah, I do. And so she like asked me all these questions. She was like, I'm going to write it out for you. You could take it to the hospital with you. That way, like you have it there. They know what you want, like all of that. Dean was not really involved in any of that. He was like, I mean, we're just going to go have a baby, like whatever. So I was like, I'm going to have this birth plan. Like you can give it to them and, all that. So she made this like beautiful thing with all these detailed whatever. And I just remember that whole pregnancy being like, I want to do this with no drugs. So I was determined to do the process drug free, all natural, whatever you want to call it. And I remember the entire time I was pregnant being like, I want to do this so bad, but I don't think I can. I want to so bad. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. I think I'm going to chicken out. Like it was all of this negative talk that was just, I wish I would have, how like current you wants to tell previous you, things you know now. And I just wish that there was someone to shake me and be like, God designed you for this. God made you with this capability. You are out of your mind if you think you can't do this. And so I prayed that entire pregnancy. I prayed, God, will you please just make it impossible for me to have an epidural? Like, I was like, I don't think I have enough self control to do this without asking for it. And I know if I ask for it, my husband's going to give it to me. Like, I just know. And so I was like, can you please, Lord, just orchestrate this? However, like, I was like, I'll labor at home for as long as possible. Like, you just make sure it doesn't happen. And so I remember that pregnancy, I was sick up until, the moment my child came out, but I was like, all my children were born the day before their due date, all three of them. This is like so weird and crazy, but hilarious. So I remember waking up at like 3 a.m. and definitely having contractions in my bed. And and I woke up and I was having contractions. I went to the bathroom. I was like, oh, maybe I have to go to the bathroom. Okay. And then I get back in bed. Then I'm to a point where I'm kneeling next to my bed with like my elbows on the bed, just like rocking back and forth, like through each one. So after like 20 minutes, I texted my girlfriend who lived across the street and I was like, hey, I think you're probably going to have to come over. We might have to go to the hospital. She was like, I'm on it.
So she was your doula then?
No, no. Okay. Sorry.
Different friend.
Because we were all Coast Guard, I didn't have anyone to watch my daughter.
Oh.
So all of us were military and I was 18 hours away from my parents or like any family members. So these two sweet friends of mine who lived across the street were like, the minute you go into labor, we have Blair. Don't worry about it. Like we have the dogs, we have Blair, we'll take care of everything. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. So sweet angels of mine. But she came over and she's the one who also was like in doula training at that point. And she was like so all about everything birth. So she came over and she was like asking me questions like, okay, like how are you feeling? Blah, blah, blah. And she was like, okay, so like how far apart are your contractions? I was like, oh, like 3 minutes. And she was like, you get out of here. You have to go like right now. I was like, no, it's fine. Like everything's fine. I was like, don't worry about it. Cause my last labor and delivery was like 14 hours long. So I was like, don't worry. It's like not a big deal. And so she was like, please get out of here right now. Luckily, the hospital where we lived in Fort Lauderdale, it was 2 miles from our house. Like it was not far at all. So I was like, this is not a big deal. It's not even like matter if there's traffic because we're right there. So get in the car, go over there, and we go into labor and delivery. And they want me to like fill out paperwork. And I'm like in active labor. And I was so annoyed that they wanted me to fill it out. They wouldn't even let Dean fill it out. And I said, this is the dumbest thing ever. And I was just so like I basically wrote like the bare minimum or whatever. But I had my birth plan on like a clipboard. I was like, here you go. Like, this is what I want. I don't want drugs. And I was like saying it, but not feeling it because I was like, oh, this is terrible. And so they put me in like one of their triage rooms where they like basically see how, progressed you are and all that. And so they put an IV in my arm and I was like, I only want an IV block. Like, I don't want meds at all. I don't want anything. They're like, no, this is fine. We just have to put it in. It's like procedure, policy or procedure, whatever. I was like, fine. But at this point, which of course, this is my first time not having an epidural, I can barely open my eyes because I'm in so much pain that I'm like trying to focus, trying to relax. And I'm in this bed and Dean is sitting like at the foot of the bed, sort of like, I don't really know what's going on or what to do, but like, okay. And she's like doing things around the room. And like the more and more I'm there, the longer I'm there, probably like 40 minutes. I got in there and they checked me and they were like, oh, you're like 3 centimeters. Like 45 minutes later, they checked me again. They're like, oh, you're 7 centimeters now in like a matter of 45 minutes. And when I tell you, I couldn't even see, I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't talk to you. I was just internal. Like I was like, I don't think I can do this. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. And so they're wheeling me upstairs. I don't even remember what it looked like. I just remember that like Dean was there and holding my hand. And so then we got into the birthing room and I leaned over and I was like, I need drugs. I need an epidural right now. This is horrible. this is so hard. And I looked at Dean and I was like, I need drugs. And he was like, okay, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. And I remember like turning over and asking the nurse for drugs. And she was like, okay, we'll get her, like, we'll go get her. And then I must have like had a contraction. And she looked at Dean across me and she was like, no. Like literally shook her head at him, like, no way is she getting an epidural. And Dean was like, okay. So like he knew, but I didn't know. So I'm just waiting for the anesthesiologist to get there. And I remember rolling back over to him and to a point where I looked at him in the eyes and I said, I cannot do this. Like, I cannot do this. And I look back now and I'm like, you were in transition, you
You were in
fool. Of
transition.
course you couldn't think you could do it. So I'm like, I can't do this. And he was like, you have to.
So for frame of reference,
Yeah.
what time is this? Because you said it was like 2 or 3 in the morning when you started feeling contractions. So what time is it now?
Okay. So I started contractions probably around 2:30. We left my house at 3. Okay. This is probably 4 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
So they come in and check me and I'm 10 centimeters. Okay.
Way to go.
So they're like, don't push. I'm like, okay. I mean, I just don't. I look back now and I want to be like, guys, really? But I, I told them, I said, I can't not, it's just happening. Like, you're telling me not to push, but like, I'm not doing it. My body's doing it. And I pushed and broke my water and it shot across the room. And Dean was like horrified. He was like, what is happening? This is a circus. And he told me, because again, my eyes aren't even open. I'm just pushing. I'm literally just pushing a baby out of me. And all the nurses are like running around. And he said, my OBGYN, they called her when they wheeled me in. And this is in a matter of 10 minutes. She was at the light outside. Like they called her when I went into the emergency room. She left her house. Like by the time she got to the light outside, I was like starting to push. She ran into my room and they were like putting scrubs and stuff on her and she like caught my baby. Like it was wild how fast. So I pushed once, broke my water, pushed 2 or 3 times and his head came out and then like he was born in 7 minutes from my water breaking to pushing him out. And again, we did not know the gender. So they put him on my chest. And it was like the first time I opened my eyes in like 3 hours because I was like not in excruciating pain anymore. And like all these endorphins hit me. And I literally was like, oh I can't even believe I just did that. Like I was like, oh my gosh. And then of course they're like, it's a boy. And I was like, what? No way. Like I just come from a family of all girls. I was shocked. It was the first boy in our whole family. I was just like blown away. And that was crazy. And I just remember being so alert. Like I was like looking around everywhere, like, what just happened? Oh my gosh. And then I was like, I'm amazing. Like I'm superwoman. Like is anyone else in this hospital like not amazed look at what I just did. Like it was like I was so aware of what my body had just done that I was like, oh, I will never look down on myself ever again about anything. Like I just was like, wow. And then of course, like all those, you know, endorphins hit you and you're just like on a high. I mean, I was on a spiritual high. I was on every high you could possibly be on. It was natural. And they, put us up in like the postpartum room. And I was like, can I shower? I'm feeling gross. I would love to shower and like get cute right now. I'm feeling good. Like, and they were like, yeah, I guess so. And Dean was like, are you okay? Like, you seem totally fine. I showered. I put some makeup on. I like blow dried my hair. I was like, can we go home? Like, I'm feeling great. This is amazing. And they were like, no, you have to stay here for 2 days. And I was like, well, that blows because I'm ready to go. So that was like a whole different monster. And when I opened my eyes and he was on me, I looked over. Kayla, you are not even going to believe this. I look over and I look at my hand and I'm hooked up to a bag of Pitocin. And I asked the nurse, I said, why am I hooked up to Pitocin? I said, that was not in my birth plan. Why am I on Pitocin right now? And she said, I kid you not. I wish I would have reported this, but she said, "Oh, we do that to all the overnight moms. Makes everything so fast." I was like, and of course, in my haze, I'm like, "Oh, well, I guess it's already done." Like, just okay. And now I just am like, I could
Wait.
scream. I could
So when
scream.
when did they start it?
So when I got to emergency, that's why I went from a 3 to a 7 to a 10
So they
because
put the IV in your arm saying, "We're not gonna hook up any drugs to it. We're just going to put it here just in case, like a hep lock or something." But
mhm, and
then
then they
they
put, yep,
actually put you on Pitocin.
yep.
For no reason because you were already contracting normally, like every
Yeah,
3 minutes.
they didn't even read my birth plan. They didn't even like they threw it in the trash, I'm sure, because
What?
they didn't even care. And of course, my husband was like, "Oh my gosh, my wife's in the most excruciating pain ever. What do I do?" You know what I mean? Like he was just like, this is terrifying. Like this is scarier than the last time because it's all natural and like, I don't know what
Yeah.
to do to help you." And I think it's so hard for men to see us in that kind of pain and be like, "I literally can't do anything.
Yeah.
Like I'm useless right now." So that was just wild, that whole scenario. And so my recovery was great. I mean, I felt so much more like myself. And I'm like riding this high for, I swear, months because I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then when Teddy was 3 months old, we moved from Fort Lauderdale to Holly Springs, North Carolina. And so I like didn't have any contact with them after either. So yeah, I just kind of was like, well, I guess that's behind me.
Mm.
So both experiences felt like it was like even the time I was educated, because the first time was like, Kathleen, you didn't know any better. You like were so foolish. You didn't look into anything. You didn't research anything. Like that's all your fault. And then the second time around, I was like, I knew all the things. I had a plan. I was very like specific with what I wanted, and I was an empowered person, and still no one gave me a voice. Like I had no voice, and I didn't even like I thought having a birth plan was like probably as good as having a doula because it was like, well, the plan is the same. But I didn't have, and he knows this is true, but like Dean was not like aware of what his role was in those scenarios. And so it was like no one super educated was there requiring people to answer to them, you know, which was really hard. So, of course, then I'm shocked again when I end up pregnant again because I mean, how does that happen twice? Like I really was like, oh, that was just like a miracle, or that was just like random, or we just got lucky. And Teddy was like 18 months old when I got pregnant the third time. And so I just remember, I mean, it was again, I like peed on the stick and it was instantly positive. And I was like, what? That is wild. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so sick again. And I have two toddlers. How am I going to do this? And then I remember thinking to myself, there is no way I will have this baby in a hospital. There's no way. I will never do that again. And I told Dean, I was like, by the way, we're having a home birth. And he was like, what? What do you mean you're having a home birth? He was like, no way we're doing that. He was like, that is insane. We're not doing that. I was like, oh yeah, we are. And of course I like looked, at this point, I had a few friends who had had a home birth. So I like messaged them and I was like, what does this mean? What does this entail? What do I look for? Whatever. So I find out that in North Carolina, it's illegal to have a home birth unless you're a CNM as opposed to like a CPM. So you have to be a
Mhm.
certified nurse midwife to legally, and you have to be under the covering of like an OBGYN. So there's only like 6 in North Carolina. And I called like 4 of them. 3 of them were like instantly I had this like discernment from the Lord that it was like, no, that is not your person. And it was like just things that came up that were like, we are not a good fit, you know? And the one I called, who I will just sing her praises until the end of time. Her name's Laura. She's with Ohana Midwifery. I remember I called her and instantly like her voice was just like so calm and so relaxed. And She was like, "Oh, okay, like tell me about yourself. And like let's see if you're within my radius. Let's see if, I have your due date available, all that." So we were just like chatting on the phone and she was like, "Just calm." I told her both birth stories and, you know, like my history and all this stuff. And she just didn't seem phased. Like she seemed very much like if she was freaked out by anything, she didn't show it. And I really loved that. Like I felt calm with her. And so we did like an interview, and I remember like coming with like a million questions and all the things, and Dean was like terrified. He was like, "This is I can't even believe we're doing this." He was not on board for a little bit, like he was just whatever. And she had told me, she was like, "The week of your due date, I have a vacation planned." She was like, "I just need you to know up front that like I'm not really super comfortable taking you on because like what if I'm not in town?" And I told her, I said, "You right now are my only option. So if you don't take me on, I will probably do this unassisted by myself in my home." And she was like, "Okay." She probably thought I was crazy or she probably thought I was insane, but she was like, "All right, we're going to talk." So that's when we like met up and chatted about things. And that entire experience was so different and so beautiful. I mean, like I was a person to her. Not only was I a person, but like I was a person she cared about. She was invested in my health. She was invested in what I was eating and like how much weight I was losing because again, I had HG and I had two toddlers running around. So like I was really struggling and all my prenatal appointments were in my home. So and this is during COVID too. So she would come to me, she would let both of my kids listen to my belly, like with her stethoscope and with her Doppler. And, she would ask them questions about like the baby. And like she was very interactive. She was very caring and nurturing and like just so the calmest spirit I've ever encountered in the birth space. And I was just so thankful for her. And so then she definitely personality wise is how Dean kind of was like, "All right, I'll maybe think about this." And I think she put him at ease throughout the whole process. And she had this birth assistant, Jenny, I'll never forget her, who does this like pre labor and delivery course that's like required. So if you use her, you have to, she's a doula, lactation consultant, and a birth assistant. So she comes for 3 hours in the afternoon and she gives you like a birth course that's like one on one. And it's covered with your birth that you pay for. And I remember Dean like rolling his eyes, like, "What do you mean what is she going to talk to us about for 3 hours?" And I
Well,
was like, "I don't know, Dean."
that's really funny because the course I teach is like 10 hours.
Is it
So,
really? Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
Well, I mean, like when you add it all up, we don't do it
Yeah,
10
yeah.
hours in a row, but when you add up
Yeah.
like all the sessions together, it's 10 hours. So in my mind, I'm like, 3 hours, man, I hope she can get through everything she needs.
Oh my
She
gosh.
needs to.
She came over with like suitcases with like baby dolls and all the equipment that they
A
would be bringing to the
pelvis.
birth and like
Hmm.
literally, oh yeah, everything. And we sat down and she gave us each like a packet of paper. And Dean, I could tell he was like, "I cannot believe I have to do this." And of course, Blair and Teddy are running around like crazy heathens. And she starts going into this like, "Here's every single thing that could go wrong in a birth. And I'm going to explain to you why, how we'll deal with it, when we've dealt with it before. And also, you can ask me any questions about it." So we're going through this like one by one by one, like shoulder dystocia, you know, hemorrhaging, like everything that could go wrong. And by the end of it, Dean is like on the edge of his seat with like a pen. Just, he's like, "This is amazing. This is, well, what did you do in that scenario?" Like, she left and he was like, "I have never felt so educated, so confident, so knowledgeable, and so ready to have a baby. And I wish I would have felt like this the first two times." And I could just tell, like, he was so on board from that moment forward. And we really trusted them. Like, it was like this relationship that they built with us because they believed that this was a beautiful thing that they got to be a part of. Like, they were not our bosses, they were our servants. Like, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, I mean that in a loving way of like, they asked everything that we wanted. We had another meeting where it was like, "What's your birth plan? Let's talk about all the things and like why you feel that way. Okay, let's talk about your feelings on this and like blah blah blah." And I just remember in one of those meetings, Jenny saying like, "We're going over all of this now so that you know, and I like we're on the same page so that at your birth, if I ask you to do something to like move your leg, turn over, whatever, she goes, in that moment, I don't want you to be like fearful and like, why? Wait, is something wrong? Blah, blah, blah. She goes, I want you to be so educated that when I ask you to do something, you trust me so much that you know why I'm asking you and you do it and you feel safe doing it. No one in the birth space had ever treated me like it was my birth. It was my experience. It was my baby. And like, it was all about me. Like, are you feeling safe? Are you feeling cared for? Do you feel like you can do this? Like, just so much different than what I had experienced before. And so I really wanted to try in the birth pool. So, like, that comes with her like birth package, basically covered everything. And so I was like, okay, whatever. So, they delivered that. And the day before my due date, I went into labor and I told her, I was like, the last one was really fast. So if they get faster and faster each time, like y'all are going to have to get here soon. And
Well, and the last one, they were pumping you with Pitocin.
yeah. Hmm.
But I do want to point out that God did answer your prayer in the
Oh,
last one
100%.
about not letting you get an epidural.
Yes. Well, and I really feel like that's why I went forward with the home birth because I was like, I did this. Like, yeah, it was really hard, but like if I did this once, I can do this again. Like it
Yeah.
was like confidence I needed to be like, no, I am taking charge here and I can do this. I know I can. Like there's not a doubt in my mind because I've done it. And so that was such a blessing. And so going into this home birth again, all these crazy nurses in the hospital situations that I did not trust. I was like, this will be a space with only people I trust, only people who love me and care for me. And my family is still really far away. I'm sure they would have been there if they could have, but they all live far away. So besides my midwife and my doula, Jenny, I asked two of my best friends to be there, Rachel and Kelly. And one of my best friends, Rachel, is a photographer. I asked her if she would photograph the birth, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, that'd be so fun." She was like, "I've never done that before, but sure." And then my other close friend, Kelly, they're sisters, which is just hilarious to me. She is like not about blood or anything, but she's been at all of her sisters' births. So I was like, "Will you please come to mine?" She was like, "Yeah, of course I'll come." So then I had our nanny come. That way, if my kids woke up or if they were awake, she could just be on kid duty. That way, like if they wanted to be with me or with like there was someone to just only be focused on them. That way Dean could be focused on me. So I like, it was like Saturday morning. I was just exhausted. I like took multiple naps that day. I was just like, I am so tired and so done. And that night we put the kids to bed at like 7:30 and it was like 8:30 and Dean was like, "Hey, like I might go play video games with some of the boys." And I was like, could you just not? Like could you just hang out with me? And he was like, "Yeah, sure." He was like, "That's why I came up and asked." Like I was trying to like gauge where you were at. And I was like, "Honestly, I'm just feeling selfish and I want you to just like hang out with me." And he was like, "Sure." So he came back upstairs and it was like 9 o'clock. And I was like definitely having contractions. Like I had a few throughout the day, but nothing consistent. And so I started having them at like 9. And from 9 to 9:30, I mean, they got intense and close. So that's when I texted my midwife and my doula. And then I texted Rachel and Kelly to come over. It was like 10 o'clock because I live right behind Rachel and Kelly. So that was an easy call to make. It was like 10 o'clock. Kelly came over. Um, and my nanny Bree was there. And like 10:15 or 10:30 that Rachel got there. And Rachel, this is so funny. Rachel had just had twins. So she brought one of the twins with her because she was only going to leave one overnight, depending on how long it was with her husband. So there was a little baby sleeping, and my kids were dead asleep. So my nanny Bree, she just held baby Judah, the whole time. It was so sweet. But I remember from like 9:30 to 10:30, everything went like it escalated quickly, very similar to the last scenario. And I just got to a point where I was like, someone needs to fill up this pool because I need relief and I don't know what to do because this is getting really, really hard. And I would like an option that, or I need to get in the shower or something. And they filled up the pool and I got in and I just remember thinking like, I was in so much pain and like my contractions were so intense. And then I like lowered myself into the pool and I was like, oh, this is so good. Like, this is the best. Why doesn't everyone do this? Like, wow, like instant relief, instant pressure relief. Like, oh, it was just so great. And so I labored in there for like half an hour. And that's when my doula got there. And I was like to a point where I was like, I couldn't talk anymore. I couldn't open my eyes anymore. I was definitely very internal and focused. And Dean was like right at my side the whole time. And he was like so hyped for this because he was like, I feel so equipped and empowered. Like it was just like so good. And he was right next to me. And I just again got to that point where I was like, man, this is really hard. This is really hard. And one of my other friends, who's also a doula, funny enough, throughout her last birth, which is right before I had Gwen, um, she had said, like, she had talked about asking God to meet her in it instead of get her around it. So I was in the tub and like wasn't even focusing on anyone else. And I just remember being like, Jesus, will you just meet me here? Like, will you just meet me here and be here with me, please? Because this is really hard. And like, I don't know if I can do this. And I just remember like having my hands on, like, Dean was holding my hand. And I remember like leaning my head to the right. And I was like my head was resting on the edge of the tub. And I turned to the right and my eyes were closed, but I could literally feel the Lord's presence in front of my face. I felt like he was right there saying, of course I'll meet you here. Like I am right here. And I just was like, oh my gosh. And I could tell that I was like kind of tense. And right when I felt his presence, my friend Kelly picked up all my birth affirmation cards, which were like scripture and um, stuff. And just, I mean, you could hear a pin drop in this room. It was the quietest experience ever. And all the lights were dim and it was like 11 p.m. And she just very quietly started reading all of these birth affirmation cards and scripture cards, like beautifully. Just the sound of her voice, I'll never forget it. And at the very end of reading them, she just started to pray. And she was holding my other hand while Dean was holding my right hand. And she just prayed and, was like, Lord, she just prayed this beautiful, beautiful sentiment of like, Lord, please bring her through this. Like, this is such a beautiful thing. And we are just asking that you'll just bring her relief and bring her through this. And I literally pushed Gwen's head right out. The minute she like said amen, I pushed and Gwen's head came out and like a few more, it was like 15 minutes of pushing too. And I just remember like pulling her up on me and like that same endorphin rush of I cannot believe I just did that. Like, oh my gosh, it's finally over. It's finally like done. But like, I looked around and I was in this space of like, of course, Rachel and Kelly and Brie are all like crying, but like in a just the sweetest way. And my midwife and my doula were on the other side of the birth tub the entire time, silent, just because they had asked me ahead of time. They were like, what do you want this to look like for you? I said, I don't want anyone to touch me unless I ask you to. And they were like, great, sounds great. We know that your body is capable of doing this. And I was like, all right, perfect. And so literally like after I had her, I couldn't even tell you what they did, but they were like little ships in the night. Like they just, they were doing all the little things, taking care of all the little things and like quiet as a mouse, like not even, it was like they didn't even take away from any of this because they were like, this is our job. Our job is to take care of her and like make sure things are okay. And so she was on me for couple minutes and then we looked and saw it was a girl and we just both felt really strongly it was a girl again too because we never knew the gender with any of our kids. And I just like the sense of joy and just even looking back now and being like what was such a like stressful and broken memory for me, the Lord just restored tenfold. I mean, he literally gifted me back a birth scenario that was so much more beautiful than I could have asked for and like totally redeemed from what I had experienced before that. And like, isn't that so characteristic of him? That he just can make anything so much better than you ask or imagine. I mean, every time. So I then got up and delivered my placenta. They put Gwen on Dean, and then my midwife took me into the shower, and I had like a stand-up shower with a door. And she just sat right on the outside and she was like, take your time, like rinse off, whatever. And I remember just being, after you have a baby, you're like, okay, now I'm gross. Someone rinse me off. Like, and I just got in the shower, rinsed off, washed my hair, whatever. And I just got out and she was like, I don't want you to move or do anything. Just stand right on this towel. And she literally like towel dried me off, put a robe on me, like put her arm under my arm and like gently walked me to my bed, tucked me in with my baby and was like, okay, now we get to weigh her. Like now we get to measure her. Like it was like this really sweet, Kelly and Rachel are sitting on the edge of my bed and Dean is sitting in bed with me. And then he's helping her weigh the baby. Like just the whole after was like sitting with my trusted people, enjoying this incredible thing that just happened to me, feeling completely cared for and safe. That like just so beautiful. And so I'm just so thankful. I really feel like it was like a gift. Like God gave me a gift of such a beautiful experience too. And it really I think it healed a lot of the brokenness from the two prior into something that is now such a special thing in my life and something I feel really proud of, but also really thankful for that just I got to experience that and live that out and really just encourage my friends going forward to be educated and empowered in all of that. And so I'm so thankful for midwives. I'm so thankful for doulas and all the people who truly care about birth, not just delivery, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. It's not, I mean, I love birth. I love hearing birth stories, but I love hearing somebody's journey
Yeah.
from, what they did, what they knew to now who they are, and just God's mercy and grace through all of that and his ability to, just like you said, like redeem it all.
Yeah.
Um, it's, we have such a wonderful God. He's so loving and he's so gracious to us. And now you get to, share in his glory with sharing this with other people and letting
Mm.
them hear the transformation and the journey and what's possible.
Yeah.
Like knowing what's possible, I think is it's just an inspiration to other people. So I really appreciate you coming on. Do you have any last thoughts or anything else you want to say before we finish?
How much time do we have left?
Well, I mean, we can take as much time as you want.
Um, After I had Gwen, I want to say she was probably like 7 months old. I I got pregnant after Gwen. This is crazy. And it was around September, October. Yeah, I don't know, something like that. And I remember being like just shocked again because, after they tell you you can't have any more kids, and then you're like, oh, okay. Well, here's number four. Like, I don't understand. Um, I got like two positives, then two negatives, then a positive, then a negative. And it was like very confusing to me. And I had a very early miscarriage at like, I want to say 7 weeks. But because there was no like confirmation about it, it was very back and forth. It was kind of confusing, like a little bit of a confusing time there. And that is like one of those things that like because I had three totally normal pregnancies, like I just like never assumed after three pregnancies you can just like have a miscarriage. You know what I mean? When like everything goes right the first few times, that's like so strange. And so I really kind of wrestled with that. And then a year that was not this past December, the one before that. And then the following year, I get pregnant again in October or November, something around that time. And that one was not as much of a surprise. We had definitely thought about it. And then it was like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. That happened quickly. And then in January, I was 11 weeks and went in for my ultrasound, and there was no heartbeat. And that was,
Mm.
again, like such a blow to me. And I was very confused. And 6 or 7 weeks is really sad to me personally. but also that was a very confusing time. And I was like, I'm not really sure what to make of this. Oh, okay. I haven't really thought about it. And now it's like, this is not happening. I just kind of assumed that it was like, this was not a healthy situation. And like, I wasn't really sure, but it wasn't as, for me, it was just more like, I'm not really sure what to make of this. And then this past January, I went in for the ultrasound and of course like Dean was working and I was like, oh, whatever, I've done this so many times. I'll just go by myself, which like don't ever go by yourself. That's a terrible idea. All my friends were like, you fool, why would you do that? And so I went in and the woman doing it there was, I mean, truly so pure of heart, so sweet just to like sit there with me when I was not expecting something like that to happen. And I remember being really frustrated because everything on the sonogram was fully intact. Nothing was broken away. Nothing was, um, there was just no heartbeat. And so I really was not sure what to make of that. And I felt like the Lord was like, pray for life right now. And I was like, okay, I want that. And I believe that, but that feels very far fetched, but I will do it. So I like messaged literally all of my girlfriends and I was like, this is what I'm dealing with right now. I just need you to pray. I just need you to pray that because they were like, you'll have to come back in a week if nothing happens and like check again. And I was like, I'm just praying for a heartbeat to just magically appear. And that weekend was really, really hard for both my husband and I. And that Sunday at church, our church is pretty definitely driven by the Holy Spirit and led by the Holy Spirit, and worship is always led by the Holy Spirit, and we just have such beautiful worship leaders. And a lot of our friends knew what was going on, and so I was at church Sunday morning, and they sang a song. I don't even remember what the song was, but of course I'm like crying, trying to like keep it together because I'm like, what am I doing? What does this look like? Or so people had come up to me and like started praying over me like during worship, and I was like standing in literally in the front row, I think. And our worship leader just went completely off set, like off book. And she does this sometimes. I mean, there's such an anointing on her. And she just went completely off script and started singing Dead Hearts Coming to Life Again over and over. And it was like, I just like couldn't believe what was happening in front of me. And it was like, God is literally talking to me right now and asking me to pray for new life. And that is terrifying, but how clear he's speaking, I will do it. And I had so many friends who had like walked that past few days with us who were like shocked just as much as I was. So I was like, I know this isn't just me hearing this. Like, this is people, it's not just me. I'm not making this up in my head. So that whole week, we just had like an army of people really going to war for us and just praying life over our family and over my body, honestly. And then I was just really wrestling with like, what do you want out of this, Lord? Like, what are you trying to do here? And that Friday, I was like crampy and like spotting. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I was just sure that if that is what was sung on Sunday, that was what was for us. And I was like, I am believing that until something else happens. So Friday, I start cramping. And then by the end of like the afternoon, I literally felt like I was in labor. I mean, I was like having contraction like pain and like kneeling on the floor and like leaning on the couch, like swinging back and forth. You know how it is. And just, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so terrible. Like, this is definitely happening. And so I texted Dean. I was like, I don't think this is good. I don't know what to do. And I was on the couch downstairs and I just stood up and realized that I like had miscarried. But because no one was home with me except my kids, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So I went to the bathroom and I was too afraid to let any of my kids in there because I was afraid they would see and be scared or be like, why am I bleeding? Like, I was like trying to shelter them, but I also was like just so confused. And I was like, Lord, what does this mean? Like, why would you speak so clearly to me to pray for new life if that's not what you had, which is okay. Like, I trust you, but I'm very confused. And I just was like, that plus I had just lost my baby. Like, it was like, what is happening? Plus, I was alone. And Dean was like, I will literally be home in 10 minutes. Like, I am going as fast as I can. And all my kids were, running around being crazy. They had no idea what was going on. And I was texting a friend of mine, Kesa, and I was just like, I don't know what to do. And she just was like walking me through, like just talking to me to kind of like keep me level headed. And I just remember sitting in the bathroom and just out of like deep despair, remembering the Lord being with me during my birth with Gwen. And I just, again, like just grief stricken, praying so hard. I just asked him, I said, will you just show me where you are? Like, will you please just reveal to me where you are right now? And I was like sitting on the toilet, crying, whatever. And I just remember praying desperately for him to show himself. And I literally felt his presence kneeling in front of me on the floor. And as I could sense him literally right there, it was so tangible. I mean, truly, I get like chills when I think about it because I'm just like so thankful that he is so tangible when we ask that of him. And I remember like this complete like word from him. It was like he was kneeling in front of me and more devastated than I was, like more broken than I was, just more destroyed. And I could just hear him saying, I don't want this either. This is not what I have for you. This is not what I want. And it was like in that moment of, I don't even know how to explain what I'm feeling right now. That's how grief stricken I am. There was someone right there who felt it too, and I felt instant relief. I mean, like, I was so relieved that there was someone in it with me, someone just as broken and who could look at what I was living and say, this is not fair. This is not okay. And this is not what my design was for you or anyone. And I just was like crying my eyes out. And it was the first time in my life that I have truly understood the meaning of joy in mourning and like beauty from ashes. It was like I was experiencing joy in mourning because the presence of the Lord was so intense and strong with me there and so comforting and so intimate that I was like, this will literally heal me, is knowing that you're here. Like, this is what will restore my soul. And as he's right in front of me, Dean came into the house and opened the door to the bathroom and knelt down. And I like see a lot of things. Like the Lord gives me like very clear pictures of things. And I could see him kneel down and take the place of Jesus, like sit right in there. And I felt like Jesus was like, don't even worry because I have literally made him for this moment for you. Like I have equipped this man who you love and trust and who is your security and protection here on this earth to literally carry you through right here. And he's got it. And it was just this really beautiful moment of, this is a whole nother story, but my husband and our marriage has just been completely redeemed and restored through the Lord. And such a beautiful picture of like, he can do that. And then also he can remind you that like, I made that good and I brought new life through that for this too. Like nothing is wasted. Nothing is for nothing. Like the redemption of my marriage is a beautiful thing I'll always be thankful for. But not only was it for my marriage and for the rest of my life, but for moments like this where I would have literally fallen apart without him and without the Lord. And just both of us that whole next week were like, this is a devastating time. And I feel joy from the Lord. I feel peace. Like I have never felt this kind of peace that truly surpasses all understanding other than this moment. And so right now we're in a space of like, okay, now what? What does our family look like? Where do we go from here? And so like it's funny because I was like, I would love to end on a great note of like Gwen's birth was like this beautiful, amazing, transformative thing. But all day I was praying about this and like, do I mention these two lost babies? Like, do I mention this brokenness and that we're still in this part? It would be lovely to be like, we had these two miscarriages and now we're pregnant with another baby and everything's great. But like, that's not where we are and that's just not real. And I trust the Lord so much, and I have been healed from these two losses, and I'm so thankful to have him. But like now we are in this, okay, what next? Lord, like what does that mean? Does that mean that, we go forward and like think about trying again? Does that mean we like pause? I don't know, but I just know that his hand, the closer and closer we get to him, his hand in our life is so, so intimate that I know that whichever direction that we go next, I will be okay and things will be okay because he has shown himself to me in each part, in the joyful moments and in the devastation. And like I don't know how people do it without him. I really don't, you know?
I'm so glad that you shared that. I'm glad that you didn't just end with Gwen's birth, even though Gwen's
Yeah.
birth was obviously
Yeah.
beautiful and redemptive. I'm glad that you went ahead and shared because, so many people are struggling
Mm,
with miscarriage, with infertility, with
yeah.
just being able to either get pregnant or maintain a pregnancy.
Mhm.
And I think that just hearing your faith and your joy amidst such a situation will be helpful for them and will be able to lift their spirits and their faith with what they're going through. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. That means a lot.
Thanks for listening.
Of course. Well, thank you again so much for being on here. I really am so glad that you were able to join us and so thankful.
Thanks for having me. I honestly enjoyed it so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting subscribe. Also, we'd love for you to leave a review of the show so that more people like you can hear more stories like these. If you're local to the Triad of North Carolina and seeking childbirth classes, birth consultations, or a birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to our website for more information. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. Also, if you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to get in touch with me. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.